what ties together the global poker series, carpets in casinos all around the planet, and 18,000 people, including top-tier celebrities, gathered in Las Vegas on November 20th, 1987. A man named Benny Benyon, often dubbed the friendliest of gangsters. It's been a while since we delved into the criminal life, and in the next couple of minutes, we're about to rectify that. Las Vegas boasts only 2 bronze equestrian statues, one for Rafael Rivera, who, according to legend, was the first white man to enter the valley where the city would later be built, and the other for Benny Benyon. On one hand, a recognized gangster who served time in prison and was officially implicated in 2 murders, but on the other hand, the soul of the company, a friend of actors, politicians, and athletes. How did it all come about? Get comfortable, friends. After all, Benny Benyon's career is not just a criminal thriller, it's also a story of how life and customs on Earth have radically changed over the past 100 years. Let's begin by showcasing Benyon's life from his early years. He was born in the tiny town of Pilot Grove in Texas, with a population of 148 people, and from an early age, he had very fragile health. It was still 24 years before the discovery of penicillin, as it was only 1904. This left parents of children like him with not-so-rosy prospects. In that era, 30% of all deaths in the USA were children under 5 years old. Given the lack of antibiotics and advanced medicine, child mortality was significant. Approaching the survival of Benyon's parents' son with a twist, he didn't have high chances of reaching adulthood, and he only completed 2 grades in school. Instead, his parents started sending him to work with his father, who had squandered the family inheritance and earned a living trading horses and cows. The idea was simple: to help his delicate immune system with fresh air and adventures. It worked, and by the age of 10, Benny's health improved. However, he didn't return to school. Instead, he acquired essential skills for his future life while working with his father. Mathematics in school was replaced by constant negotiations with buyers. Physics turned into cheating with scales to sell animals at higher prices, and geography transformed into observing supply chains and smuggling routes that intersected with cattle drives. Instead of socializing with other children, Benny socialized by playing gambling games with his father and other traders. Around the time Benny reached adulthood, the United States introduced prohibition. You can easily guess what became of a child with such a childhood. Of course, a smuggler. Legends say that once Benny sweet-talked and treated the entire police department to drinks to steal confiscated moonshine. But Benny's involvement in bootlegging was short-lived. That's where his uniqueness lay. Benny always understood his place in the world, never taking on more than he could handle, not crossing his superiors, and leaving a business if he felt he hit a ceiling. From an ordinary small-time crook, Benyon began to transform into a legend in Dallas. In 1928, he opened his first lottery there, fully realizing that moonshine was nothing compared to the allure of gambling. Right from the early stages, what set Benny apart from competitors was his unwavering dedication to his customers. He always paid, invited them to dinner, and wasn't averse to having a chat. In fact, the tradition of limousines used for entertainment in Las Vegas began with Benny. He was the one who started providing premium clients with limousine rides at his expense and sending turkeys to regular players on Christmas. But that's a story for later. Let's first remind ourselves of what Dallas was like in the 1920s and 1930s. Amid crisis after crisis, the Great Depression replaced Prohibition, and basically nobody had money. An ironic situation developed where the mafia was better at preventing corruption than the government. Instead of bribes, gangsters paid police officers salaries, and quite officially, Benny Benyon was at the forefront of this scheme. It was simple. Twice a week, police officers would visit his gambling establishments and count the players' heads. The next morning, Benny's assistants would go to the mayor's office, confess guilt, and pay a $10 fine for each client. This led to a situation where by the mid-1930s, the Dallas sheriff, Bill Decker, essentially became Benny's best friend. This mutually beneficial collaboration worked both ways. If the sheriff needed some particularly fervent criminals, let's say out of town, he would call Benny. Benny, in turn, would call the sheriff if any of his rivals got too cheeky and risked upsetting the fragile balance established in the city. Of course, it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. By 1933, Benny had expanded his repertoire beyond gambling to include racketeering. You can understand what methods he used to clear away competitors. He also had to get his hands dirty in the process. In 1933, Benny got into a conflict with Frank Bolding, another bootlegger and racketeer. Well, conflict might be an understatement. Benny simply blew his brains out with a revolver, earning himself the lifelong nickname Cowboy. However, Benny even managed to execute the murder elegantly. He concocted a story that during a peaceful conversation at a cafe, Frank attacked him with a knife. and although Benny later admitted to making up the story, it worked in 1933. The gangster received only a 2-year suspended sentence for the murder. It's unclear what ultimately played a role, whether it was the fact that the deceased Frank Bolding had a terrible reputation in the community, or the color of Frank's skin, which, you understand, was a factor. In any case, Benny embraced the mantra of self-defense, and later, in 1936, after killing another of Ben Frieden's competitors, Benny even shot himself in the shoulder to make the self-defense version even more convincing. Overall, business was good until World War II. It took Benny 11 attempts, but he finally eliminated another competitor, Herbert Noble. But apart from that, Dallas was not the best place. An enormous number of soldiers looking for entertainment flooded the city, and the delicate balance was disrupted. Major Chicago gangs didn't hesitate to eliminate competitors, and the government pressed on the gangsters even harder. As previously mentioned, Benyon always knew when it was time to exit a business. In 1946, Benny packed his bags and left for Las Vegas. His initial attempts to establish himself in the City of Sin didn't meet with much success, but in 1951, Benyon's Horseshoe, the Gangsters Hotel, opened, forever changing Vegas. It still stands today, almost hinting at Benny's business success. However, the scale of innovations brought to the entertainment industry by this seemingly ordinary gangster is much greater. Firstly, Benyon set up a display in the casino with $1 million in cash, not only attracting tourists but also serving as a form of payment. The second innovation, elevated betting limits, revolutionized casinos worldwide. Previously, bet sizes were strictly regulated, but at the Horseshoe, one could bet virtually any amount, and Benny never shied away from large payouts. The third innovation was total equality. In those times, casinos were often elitist establishments focusing on dancing, prostitutes, and concerts. The Horseshoe broke the trend by focusing entirely on gambling, with fairness for all. Unlike other hotels, the same table hosted both common workers and millionaires like Howard Hughes. By the way, Tony Stark's prototype was also a close friend of Benny's since the Dallas days. Another trademark was the carpets and the overall layout of the casino floor. In essence, it's safe to say that their modern appearance was pioneered by the Horseshoe and Benny Benyon. Before that, casinos resembled a hybrid of strip clubs and restaurants. Benny's achievements in gambling reached such heights that his methods are now taught in the best institutions for marketing, as if forgetting that he only had 2 years of formal education. Then, however, tough times hit Benny's life. In 1952, the cold hand of justice finally caught up with him. True, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison not for murder, but for tax evasion. The gangster himself referred to this incident as a wicked deception by the government. According to Benny, the deal was already settled, and he intended to pay fairly, as always. He was cruelly deceived, stripped of his license, and thrown behind bars. Of course, such trivialities couldn't stop the seasoned gangster. Control of the casino formally passed to his children, and Benny truly etched himself into history after prison. In 1970, ever heard of the WSOP, the World Series of Poker? That's his brainchild. In those times, casinos were lukewarm towards poker tournaments. They took up a lot of space, mainly competing for money against each other, and brought only meager commissions to the establishments. Moreover, cheating, conflicts, and card debts made these activities dangerous. Generally, tournaments were mainly held among friends and in very limited formats. Benny changed that by creating the WSOP, in which anyone could participate by just paying a deposit. In 1972, 194 people paid $10,000 each to participate. Benny even sold the rights to televise the event, thereby solving all problems with earnings, cheating, and advertising his casino worldwide. The World Series of Poker continues to this day, having become a true monster with its stars, spin-offs, and intrigues. And on Benny's birthdays, tens of thousands of his friends would come to Las Vegas. Benny is called the friendliest gangster in history, who lived such a tumultuous life that nobody could remember how it all began. On November 20th, 1987, 18,000 people visited the Horseshoe, calling themselves friends of the gangster who lived for another 2 years after this event. Benny passed away on December 25, 1989, leaving his business to his children. They, as is often the case, handled the mission rather poorly. Ted Benyon, who managed the Horseshoe, was killed in 1998, leaving behind one of the juiciest mysteries in history. After the revision and study of Ted's letters, it was revealed that $20 million had disappeared from his inheritance. There is a suspicion that they are buried near his ranch in the form of coins, which treasure hunters have been looking for a quarter of a century. But that's a different story. If you want a video about treasures, let me know in the comments. Well,